Our next question is from Sam W, who's from the internet. Hey, old-time fan of your channel, MBZ, but only recently been catching up on your podcasts. Personally, I love Pokemon, but X and Y really rubbed me the wrong way. But it was less so the game itself, but rather what it might imply. To this day, in my opinion, each Pokemon game always had its own personality due to the fact that it had its own set of sprites. But now we have entered the realm of 3D. I'm worried that Pokemon will go down the same route as the new Super Mario Bros. Games did, where every game from now on will be stuck to the same style. Do you think this will be the case? On top of that, do you think that this could be a benefit with more time to focus on world and Pokemon designs? Cheers, Sam.
Okay, well, it's very infrequent that I say, Bali, let's answer a Pokemon question, because I feel like
the time has
we
come.
Get a lot of people who are like, let's talk about this Pokemon thing that I want to talk about, but I'm like, no, I'm done with Pokemon, I'm not talking about it. But I think this is a very interesting one, because it kind of addresses the aesthetics and the identity, I feel, of these games, and I think it can be applied more broadly to other franchises. I tend to agree, like in the sense that the way that Pokemon evolved was it went through hardware iterations, and over the years, every game looked distinctly different, despite the perspective being the same and all that kind of, staying similar. Its sprite design and its world creation and everything kind of evolved and differentiated itself to the point where you could look at an individual sprite and be like, this is from this generation, and this is why it looks different from this one, and the animations have changed. And I do think that when you move to the world of polygons and 3D, it starts to become more homogenized, and there is a danger for certain that Pokemon goes down the route where they just stay in this kind of bland 3D kind of art style and don't change it up and don't make it different and stand out. And I think that's one thing that makes Zelda quite unique, is in that series, the way that they've dealt with the changes and the things that came about is they consistently fuck around with the art style. It's probably my favorite thing about Zelda is like it always is Zelda, but it also has its own unique identity because they try and push the boundaries somewhere different. And you look at X and Y in Sun and Moon, and yeah, you've moved from the chibi characters to the kind of more grown-up style characters, but art style wise it looks exactly the same, and the Pokemon on screen look exactly the same. So like from that perspective of like the polygons are just kind of meshing together, I do feel like it's losing some identity, and that is worrying, because I think that you may come to a point where you can't really differentiate and distinguish. How do you feel about it, Bali?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with those points. I think that a big part of this is all about when does developers choose to use the same engines for newer games, etc. So, like you said, with Zelda, they so rarely use the same engine. Obviously, Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass is maybe the only exception I can think of.
Majora and Ocarina.
Majora and Ocarina, that's a very good example as well. But other than that, every single Zelda feels so distinctly different, and it's very impressive that they keep reinventing it, because that's a lot more manpower for ultimately potentially less reward in terms of finance. So I think that with Pokemon, which is such a gradual iterative series, it is weird that X and Y had the first generation of Pokemon, generation 6 or 7?
6,
and 7's about to come out with Sun Moon, right?
Yeah.
So it was weird that with generation 6 it was the first generation where there were no sprites, right? Like this was the first
it's
time.
It's all polygons now.
Exactly.
It's all 3D.
So it's weird to visualize Pokemon in only 3D and never have sprites of them. Like I still can so clearly remember the original 150 and what their sprites look like on Red and Blue. I mean, I did play that game earlier this year.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're before I even played that this year, they were so clear in my mind and very like in the back of my mind the whole time. And
I mean, they're janky as well. Like they look kind of rough, but
they look very funny.
That roughness has a real personality to it, you know.
Yes.
Like, and I think that's something that gets lost is like the unique kind of artistic design of those Pokemon and the way they are represented in those older games is. It just becomes homogenized with this era of 3D graphics where you just kind of have, hey, this is the model and this is what it looks like and it's clean and is just the same every time.
And like as much as Black and White and then Black and White 2 were the same engine, and was that a similar engine or the same engine to Diamond and Pearl?
I think it was modified. It was different. Definitely
similar,
different.
But I think, and as much as X and Y and Sun and Moon are looking similar in terms of the engine used, I think that it'll be really interesting to just see what happens on Switch and how much the graphical style can improve, because, you know, I've harped on about this so much on this podcast about, oh my God, Pokemon is going to come to a home console. Like, what is this going to look like? And the Switch is going to be a little bit more powerful than the Wii U. Pokemon was never on the Wii U. It's never been on a home console. So, like, you've got real scope to go for a new art style, go for a new game engine, go for something different.
I would love to see, like, what does Pokemon look like cell shaded, you know? Like, try something different, go in a different bold direction, but unfortunately, I just don't think that is a main priority of the series. I don't think visuals have ever been a main priority. And so despite the fact that they have more to work with the Switch, I have a fear that it will probably just continue what they've been going down.
You think it'll look very, very bog standard on Switch?
Yeah, I think it'll look just, you know, hey, it looks very nice and HD, but the models are just going to be the same and not much like distinctive to it. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how series like, you know, Fire Emblem, for example, where I felt like, especially in those GBA games, those sprites had such personality and joy to them, and I like what Awakening and Fates does, but it loses something for me. You know, it becomes more generic. It doesn't kind of have that spark to it anymore that kind of, you know, made my imagination kind of well.
I mean, Awakening and Fates, again, like, as distinctive as those games are, they are still very similar, very sort of artistically, and they are the same game engine, etc., etc. Obviously, the mechanics are completely different, as we've discussed, but it's interesting to see where Pokemon can go and how safe they play it on Switch, because I would be convinced that the Switch is going to sell pretty well. It's not going to be Wii, but it's going to be better than Wii U, and it's going to need like big ass games, and Pokemon is one of those big ass games. And I can imagine Nintendo Game Freak putting out as many Pokemon games in that life cycle. I'd say two to three generations on the Switch potentially. But
that's a lot of generations, Bally.
Definitely two. Let's go for two. But I think that I would be scared that between those generations, it's just going to be the same engine. The games will look almost identical, but you know what? It's Pokemon and people will buy it anyway, and that's a little concerning. But that's just the way that Pokemon is, so you can't really change that. I think. I don't know.
Yeah, that's how it goes. If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more, consider subscribing to us on YouTube and following the podcast playlist. You can also find us on iTunes and various other places. Follow us on Twitter at TNL Podcast and email us thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.